And that's what makes us human, being empathetic with other people. No other creature can do it at the level that we can do it.
Cues for leadership.
Welcome to another episode of Behavioral Echoes, where communities of thought leaders are brought together to explore the connections between neuroscience, wisdom, leadership, and its application to business and personal growth. Today, we have a special guest who many of you may know, one who excels in thought leadership and is active in sharing and learning insights from leaders around the world.
We would like to welcome Luis to our podcast. He's the co-founder of 𝗟𝘂𝗶𝘀 since 2023, and it's an online community of practice and collective making sense of new ways of working, collaborating, relating, leading, and organizing using digital tools to create value. He's a seasoned leader with 30 years experience in the space of knowledge management, collaboration, learning, leadership enablement, change management, and social networking for business and online communities. We are so happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Chris, for having me. It's a pleasure and a true honor to be with you here today.
So, where are you based from?
I'm originally a Spaniard, born and raised in the northwest of Spain, currently based in a tiny island in the Canary Islands, the Gran Canaria in the south, where I have been living out here for nearly 22 years.
When you say community, you really mean it. I mean, you've been around, and when you're on an island, my gosh, how important community is. You describe yourself as understanding the value of online communities. So how does that translate into facilitating, or I guess the ability to steward good conversations? Because I think that's what holds communities together.
It's important to mention where I live for understanding the context of community, not just because I live in an island and obviously the community is a lot tighter and closer, but it's also about why I have always said of the importance of online communities to connect the world, right? Now, Lisa mentioned that I had 30 years experience working in the IT sector. Of those nearly 30 years, I have been working away from a traditional office for 25 plus years, which means that I had to build my own community or communities or networks, right? And especially living in a tiny island away from the buzz of major cities like Madrid, Barcelona, London, Paris, or whatever. I live in a tiny island that is the size of London, literally, right?
Okay.
And I live in a small village of 6,000 people, right? So for me, it was important to focus on building community to help people understand how we needed a new form of getting work done beyond individuals and teams to tackle complex problems, right? So to me, community is eventually about not just sharing knowledge for the sake of our shared knowledge, but it's more about building human connection. It's about connecting with people and use technology as an enabler. We're social animals, you guys know that. You know, we function in tribes, right? But then obviously you go into larger groupings where there's networks or communities, and then obviously that implies a different way of thinking, behaving, and leading than traditional hierarchical teams, for instance.
Quick follow-up question before Lisa jumps in with a few questions. Two things that I think are really urgently important for people and our listeners particularly to hear. One is that you live community because you have to live community. And it's not just something that you learned and decided, hey, you know what? I figured out some really good things about community and I'm going to go teach them and create a real community. But because of the fact that you've lived community, you also know how to build them and how to make them work. Like literally greenfield, organic from the bottom up.
Yes. And actually, it's important what you mentioned there, because I typically see two different kinds of people. People who walk the talk because they see a genuine need to be part of a community, and people who tell you that they want to build community around them. So the me, and then everyone else, right? That's unfortunately what we see in a lot of the corporate world, where someone tells you, yeah, I'm going to create a community. No, you're not. The community has already been created. You're just too late, or you haven't been paying attention. The need has already been there from all along. What you just discovered is that you suddenly need to be part of something bigger than you, right? I focus more on that, walking the talk about, if you're part of a community, that's because you feel that you have a need to be part of the community. So the question is, why do you have the need to be part of the community? Is it to fill gaps? Is it to grow? Is it to continue learning, to co-create whatever you need to co-create? And I focus more on that genuine need of us understanding how we need to live with community, right? And the way I use as an example of how a lot of technologies are being used today, because, I've always said that technology is neutral until you start applying it, right?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing there is that I see a lot of efforts where we don't build community, we build audiences. So you basically have one or two people creating content, they feed it onto a group of people, and then in exchange, they just give you some money or whatever, monetary fund or what you want. That's not community. You're just basically creating a following to sycophange you and advocate for you, but not to be true peers of the same network, of the same community, right? And then obviously there are ways of using technology where you can actually turn the community against each other and divide and then become more individualistic, which I think is one of the major problems that we now have with the so-called social media, right? Where we no longer build community. I mean, I'll give you an example to explain this. I'm going to call it Twitter because to me it still is Twitter, right? I refuse to call it
Me too.
X. But Twitter back in the day, so 20, 21 years ago, it was truly a global community. It was truly the global pulse of the world in terms of how things were happening both at work and outside, because it was a group of people who understood a need to get together, to learn, to grow, to co-create together, right? It's a completely different story to what it is nowadays. Right now, it's all
Very divisive.
polarized, it's all divisive, it's all about treasuring and cultivating the individualistic self versus the sense of community. Let's all be together, right? So I focus more on that. Let's be together. Let's build community together as peers, not as someone telling you, oh, I'm going to create a community and you're going to do it as I say you do. No, that's nonsense,
Gotcha.
right?
To me, Louis, that brings us to when you're talking about community, because yes, as you know, I'm part of 𝗖𝘂𝗶𝘀. I understand that community and something that you've co-created, which is wonderful. But some of that intent and that purpose was really looking at that remote and hybrid work. And I just want sort of your take on this as to what this really means and how you're helping change that.
Um, you know, when we first put together 𝗖𝘂𝗂𝗀 as a community, we knew that there was something poignant, a serious need that we wanted to tackle, which was have an opportunity for a bunch of practitioners to come together, convene, and share their experiences as distributed workers, whether they were doing remote work or hybrid work or distributed work, right? Because at the time, I felt that there were a lot of people whose voices were left out. People with disabilities, people who had caretaking needs, people who were bullied at work, people who were harassed at work, people who had long commutes and they were sacrificing their personal life for something called work. And when they were airing their voices about why they wanted to keep working distributedly, so basically on their terms, not the firms, I felt that those voices were not heard long enough and loud enough. And that's why I felt for the need to 𝗖𝘂𝗂𝗀 to exist, right? We've been running for nearly 2 years, and if there's one thing that I have got very clear is that I don't think that there's a better time for 𝗖𝘂𝗂𝗀 to exist, to give a voice and a platform and a space, a safe space for people to tell everyone what it is like working on their terms and not someone else's, where you decide based on whatever you have to do at work, whatever your objectives, whatever the results, but you do it on your terms, whenever, whatever, with whoever. And technology becomes the enabler of that. And it's funny when people tell me, yeah, but what about technology? What about AI? That's going to disrupt work. I say, no, it's not going to disrupt work. Why? Because your boss still wants you at the office using AI tools. We have a unique chance, and I keep telling people about this, and it may be a bit of my radical thinking, but I strongly believe in it. The pandemic have shown us that we have a unique chance to reframe the work has been conducted over the course of the last 200 years. Move away from that notion that work is a physical space to consider that work is a state of mind. It requires a completely different mindset in terms of how you lead virtual teams, in terms of how you create a sense of belonging, therefore community. How do you build bonds and personal business relationships with people who are no longer collocated down the corridor like you are? That flexible work where the office disappears, the physical office disappears, that's our chance to reclaim not just the work we do, but the lives we live.
Our mission, it's people. And
Yeah.
people have lives. They are a growing thing, a living thing, And the only way things live is they have to be generating some kind of growth, be it slow,
Right.
be it massively fast. But if it's not growing as a living organism, it's dying.
Yeah, and you know, this is super interesting because and I found it a bit ironic that we're having this conversation about people in the age of generative AI or AI in general, right? Where everything seems to be going through the automation route about having automated services, writing what we want to write and thinking what we want to think, and you know, even doing therapy with them, right? And I don't think that there is a way to escape that wave of using those automated services. But I do see an opportunity to narrow them down, right? So narrow the scope. Organizations will always have humans, will always have people. And therefore, if we think that, you know, there will be people-centric, we need to start acting like they are people-centric, because right now it's not happening.
And I think I like what you said, Lewis, when you talked about, the world that's been that way, the working world for about 200 years, and you said this is a new way of work. We talked a lot about the underrepresented group. We talked about the work that was remote because of the pandemic. And I really see that as a huge opportunity to change the way we work because those underrepresented groups have not been part of that corporate world for that 200 years. They've been much more recent, and it's a great time to do that change. I'd love to have your perspective on that because you really got me thinking.
It is. And you know what? Again, it's cultivating that diversity of thought, but also of work-life experience, right? And there are numerous examples about the use of technology being biased and producing results where all of those minority groups have been ignored, neglected, right, or even harmed. I think, you know, with one of the things that happens with remote work or distributed work is that all of a sudden you realize that it's no longer just about you in your fancy office. That is about a whole bunch of other people who have got other needs than just your work, than just your firm. You know, they have, you know, if they have got some kind of disability, is that disability. If they have got caretaking responsibilities, whether it's offspring or elder family members, it's going to be there. You have got people who feel that at the workplace they've been bullied because of having different race, different color, different, you know, whatever, religious belief, political belief. Those things are actually a lot more exposed when you work away from the office. And I know that people would tell me, yeah, but you know, if you work in an organization where people are bullied, you can also do that when they work remotely. And I go like, is that if you want to bully when you work remote, you need to write it down, which means that it's traceable, auditable, for which you can get laid off in a minute because your business conduct guidelines tell you that you need to be nice to your colleagues and not to be an asshole. And because I now see that you're being an asshole when you write it down, then you're out. Is that now we need to be intentional about what we do. Now we need to write down how I want to communicate, how I want to relate, how I want to lead, and how do I want to get my work done. That takes effort. It's a muscle that you build, right? Because writing, I know that a lot of people are not very good at writing. I wasn't 25, 30 years when I started working. But that's practice. It's muscle that you build, right? And eventually you learn how to communicate and you learn how to relate and how to collaborate and everything else. And when you do it in an environment where those minorities are heard, where they do have a voice, where they do have a presence, their presence, you realize that all of these 200 years, we have been neglecting some of the best talent ever. To sit down and think that this is not just about me. So the cult of the individual is demolished in favor of the cult of all of us, the community that we build around it.
So, Lewis, in some of our previous conversations, I know that the question comes up about, hey, if you could be a superhero or a fictional character or have a superpower, what would it be, or who would you choose?
I'm going to go for a real character, a real person, right?
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. And then actually, it's funny because it had an influence in who I am today. Although that person lives on the other side of the world to me, right? So, and there is a context about this. So the character is Magic Johnson, right? How
The
I got to
basketball player.
know the basketball player, that's
Okay.
right. So how I got to know him was that I up until I was 23 years old, I used to play basketball every day for 4 or 5 hours, right?
Wow.
I was born and raised in the, you know, early 70s and then the 80s. So when Magic Johnson and then Larry Bird and then Michael Jordan came forward and everything else. And Magic understood that playing a game to win is a team effort. That you can be a star, but your role as a star is to make everyone else a star, not just you. It's to make people greater. than you are. And he did it. And it was called magic. It was called showtime, because you knew that when you were watching a basketball game with him, you knew that you were going to entertain by the whole team. It was one exercise of performance to the excellent and saying, it's not just me and four guys. It's the five of us building our powerhouse that can demolish anything, anyone. Whenever I look into community, I got that from a very young age that me alone cannot do anything.
Gotcha.
Me with a bunch of people can conquer the entire world. And that's what we need to work on, right? Is building that magic. 40 years later, I'm still talking about him like I was a young kid playing basketball back then.
And others are being compared to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's what I see the role of the leader. The leader is not just to be bossing around and telling everyone what's going on. The role of the leader is to make everyone great and get rid of the hurdles, get rid of the obstacles, and remove yourself as an obstacle as well. So when you think about remote work or distributed work, you realize that work is just one other facet of your life that happens in a very constrained time,
Very small,
where you need to deliver that, and then other things happen in your life. And that if you look into one and the other things have got much more importance than work. So I've always found it silly when I see a lot of organizations asking their employees to choose between their job and their family. I go like, is that a choice?
Right.
Is that really a choice? No, it's not, right? I say, yeah, but we get this great salary. I say, I know, but jobs, there are thousands of them. Family, you got one. And the biological one, you're stuck with it for life. So no, that's not a choice.
So for the listeners, if someone wants to challenge the status quo, whether it's individually, as a team, or as an organization, what do you think is the single most transformative shift in the mindset or behavior to advocate for?
Wow, what a question. Openness. Be open to the unknown. Be curious about the unknown. Transparency. It's probably the biggest disruptor right now. Transparency. So instead of protecting and hoarding your knowledge, your insights, or whatever, share them openly. But perhaps the most fundamental shift that I can see in terms of challenging the status quo, and here's the thing. The mindset shift is that if you are willing to challenge the status quo, you also should be willing to die in the process. And die meaning you can be fired, you can be let go, you can move on. Life will go on.
Exactly.
You will move on. What I have been trying to do for the last 30 years.
Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. I mean, the bottom line is nothing changes unless something moves. And I hear, Luis, you saying very strongly, be okay being a mover. It may not be comfortable, but be okay, because the rewards, especially if you're a person who is empathic, if you're a person who cares about what's at the core, what's at the pulse, what makes a company's culture beat, it's people. It's not the mechanistic stuff. It's not the processes. It's not HR per se. So, Luis, how can our listeners now and in the future join your community or pick your brain as leaders themselves?
Can I say something before that?
Sure.
Because I wanna highlight something that I think is critical that you mentioned there that we're not exercising nowadays enough, which is empathy. We need to bring empathy back into our lives, not just to the workplace, but also as who we are in a society. The fact that we have the many problems that we have right now is because we have decided a while ago, decades ago, to leave empathy behind. And that's what makes us human, being empathetic with other people. No other creature can do it at the level that we can do it. And why is that? Because we can relate to the pain that you're experiencing. I can put myself in your shoes and experience the same pain. We need to bring empathy back. So thank you for mentioning empathy, because I think it is so critical.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So
right there with you.
So where people can find me, if they're interested in 𝗟𝘂𝗶𝘀, 𝗟𝗂𝗫𝗀.org, right? 𝗟𝗂𝗫 is for asynchronous community.
Got it.
Because we love to walk the talk and lead by example, where if we advocate about this, it's because we have been living this way and working this way for decades, not just as a result of the pandemic. People can also find me on LinkedIn. My personal business blog is also 𝗟𝘂𝗶.net, ELSUA.net. And I'm making a transition from the traditional social media into the Fediverse. So if people are using Mastodon, I'm also there. I'm also on PixelFed where I share pictures, where I try to annotate my life through the things that I experience in my life, right? And that's usually where people can find me.
We'll be sure to include Luis's contact information in the description. Luis, thank you for joining us and sharing your wonderful and inspiring insights and your thoughts. Perhaps we'll have the opportunity to talk again soon.
My pleasure. It's been a pleasure being with you both, and I look forward to that opportunity to talk more soon.
Super.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers, for joining another great episode of Behavioral Echoes, where science and wisdom matter. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.